Well, thank you for having me. And before I left the table, Bob told me to be careful. People had enjoyed a nice breakfast, and they didn't want us to mess it up. But I'm a Republican. I don't make any bones about that. I'm also a Georgia Bulldog, and I always pull for my Bulldogs. I always pull for the Republican Party, and I'm looking at some of my colleagues now, pretty confident that we're going to win the House, the Senate, and the White House. Not because we're that good, maybe, but because the other side's that bad. And I have to remind them that a couple of years ago, the Georgia Bulldogs won the national championship, except for a coach from Alabama put a man from the bench in named Tua, and he threw a ball on the last play of the game, and the Georgia Bulldogs walked out of there in second place. And so one thing that I would tell you is that this election's at halftime right now. And it's an extremely important election for agriculture. And I'm going to share with the leadership of this conference a video, and it's Secretary Vilsack speaking before the House Ag Committee. It's February 14th of this past year. And some of you saw it. He and I got into a little, I'll call it back and forth to be nice. But you need to listen to what he had to say. And you need to remember that he's saying this in the context of a time when we don't have a farm bill. We're operating under an extension, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. And we're $35 trillion in debt right now. And today our deficit, today's deficit, and I want to remind you, we're not in a recession, we're not in a war, and we're not in some type of health care emergency like we were in under COVID. Today's deficit for the last 365 days is $2.37 trillion. It is one of the largest deficits in the history of the country, outside of those couple of years where we had COVID and we were having to do things pretty rapidly that most of the things we did, I think, were good for the economy. But what he said was, farmers have had record income over the last 3 years. In fact, they've had the best 3 years in the last 50 years. I would say the best 3 years in the history of the United States of America. February 14th, that's our Secretary of Agriculture's testimony before the House Ag Committee. He said the problem is it's concentrated in the hands of a select few. The top 7% of farmers, have had 85% of the profits. Can anybody tell me how much your revenue has to be in the top 7% of farmers? $500,000. $500,000 in revenue. There are a lot of people, and I was in this group, so I'm not criticizing. I love them. But, you know, those of us who have, 100 head of cows, we're important people. We're important to the community. But from the standpoint of the food supply that the American citizens are used to walking into a gas station and seeing food on the shelf, and a grocery store and seeing food on the shelf, it's those farmers that have over $500,000 in revenue, and we're talking revenue, not profit, that are the ones that create the tons of food that turn into the groceries that we buy on a daily basis. Keep in mind, the Secretary of Agriculture today saying this. It's concentrated in the hands of those who have over $500,000 in revenue. Those people have had the best 3 years ever. He talks about how, because of those best 3 years, they're prepared for the downturn that they've seen coming. I just respectfully disagree with him. I disagree with him. And I think that the numbers are going to show that he was wrong in his statement. And as we talk about a farm bill, I want you to know, and things are different now than they've ever been in the past. It's been easier in the past. It's harder now to get anything done in Washington, D.C. I think we'll operate under an extension. I certainly hope that President Trump becomes the President of the United States and he selects somebody like Sonny Perdue to be the Secretary of Agriculture who actually cares about production agriculture and understands production agriculture and understands that there's a difference in revenue and income and understands that we need chemicals to grow our crops and understands that that we need trade, we need to be opening up additional markets and understands that the American farmer needs choice. They need choice in the chemicals they use, the seed they plant, the crops they grow, and they need choice in who they sell it to. Because other than that, if you don't have any choice, we're all almost sharecroppers, right? We don't like to talk about it. The fact of the matter is we don't have a whole lot of choices anymore. And that's something we've got to fix. But I want you to know one other thing. 2 days ago, I listened to a banker answer a question from a cotton farmer. Most of you grow cotton too. And the question was, to the banker was, of the people that you're banking today, what percentage of them do you think you'll be able to bank next year if something doesn't change? And this is an ag lender, and the response was 80%. You know, translate that another way, 20% of the people that are farming today won't be able to farm a year from now, according to that banker, and she's from Alabama, and she's concentrated in agriculture. We've got to get a farm bill. And that farm bill has got to take care of American production agriculture. The 7% that produce the crops that have over $500,000 a year in revenue have got to be able to mitigate their risk. That means we have to have crop insurance that works, and it means that we also have to have reference price increases. And I want you to understand, the risk to ARC and PLC is real. And one of the things that has never been done that I think needs to be done pretty quickly, or we may lose it all, is all of Title I, ARC and PLC need to be made permanent law. It is temporary law. And if it's not made permanent law, then I'm afraid that we would ultimately lose it. And if we don't get reference price increases, the value of it's going to go away anyway. Think about the hit to your balance sheet as an American farmer if base acres means nothing anymore. There's a lot of risk out there right now. You got a lot of good people representing you in Washington, D.C. You've got a lot of people up there that are fighting for you to get things done. I think we got a pretty good bill out of the House Ag Committee. We had 4 Democrats that voted for it. Sanford Bishop from my home state voted for it, and I thanked him afterwards. And I'll tell you, there are a lot of people that voted against that bill in the committee. They may lose their races for voting against it because their farmers know who voted yes and who voted no. I don't know if we have the votes to pass it on the floor of the House of Representatives. The one thing I will tell you I do know is we don't have the votes to pass it out of the United States Senate. And so, as I outlined for you, the options between now and the end of the year, it's pretty simple. Either things stay the same, which means Republicans have the House, Democrats have the Senate, and you have a Democrat in the White House, and someone like Secretary Vilsack in the Secretary of Agriculture's position. And if that happens, maybe we get a farm bill before the end of the year. I think it's unlikely. And if it is, there's something I want you to recognize. In the 2010 Farm Bill, SNAP was 67%. SNAP or some other type of food assistance program was 67% of total Farm Bill spending. Today it's 80%. Production ag, even in the House bill, which is the best bill I think we're going to get, production ag gets about 10% of what we call the Farm Bill in total spending. If the Senate bill is written by Debbie Stabenow, I think you're going to have a lot of requirements in there on how you're going to farm to be eligible for some of that 10%. if the Republicans win the Senate and John Bozeman is the chair of the Senate Ag Committee, then I think we'll get a much better farm bill. Just being candid. And maybe we get it before the end of the year because the Democrats know he's going to have the gavel in January, and maybe we have to wait until February or March to pass it. But what I will tell you is, no matter what we get, if it goes to a Secretary of Agriculture that thinks that a farmer with $500,000 in revenue is part of the problem, and that if that farmer wants to have additional sources of income, then they can go into climate smart farming, or they can look for ecosystem markets, or they can move things into renewable energy. It's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. And so, I want to just ask you to keep us in your prayers. It's not any fun in Washington anymore. It's really not. There are a lot of good people that are leaving right now. And know this, there are a lot of good people up there that are working pretty hard for you. And things are different now. And the things we're going to have a serious conversation about is whether or not we leave SNAP and production ag tied together. We've gone from SNAP getting 67% of the farm bill to now it gets 80%. If it continues to stay tied together, I think that 80% moves to 85%. And I'm just telling you, the American farmer deserves better than 10% out of what we call the farm bill. And if the elected officials aren't listening or paying attention and understanding, they need to recognize that there are a couple of people that the Americans truly love. They love their soldiers, they love their law enforcement officers, and they love their farmers. And they want all three of them taken care of. And I can tell you, it's not happening right now in Washington, D.C. So I hope you enjoyed your breakfast. I hope I didn't mess it up too bad. There's no such thing as a solar farm. God's still in control, and there's an election right around the corner, and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this morning and to represent you in Washington.